Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, viewers and listeners from all across Guyana, the Caribbean, and of course, UK, USA, Canada, and wherever you are. A warm and a wonderful evening to you as we are set to welcome GECOM Commissioner Mr. Vincent Alexander to Room 592. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Kaieteur Radio, our operator, Mr. Kevin Smith, of course, my co-host, Leonard, Gildarie, and Glenn Lal, we welcome you to this room 592 where we unleash the truth. As you know, ladies and gentlemen, we have been having guests every night on our program here, and the elections have taken everybody's attention across the length and breadth of this country, in the Caribbean, all across the world. Everybody's looking on to see what's happening at these Guyanese elections. And so tonight we are fortunate to have a gentleman who has been distinguished in his political career. He has been a mainstay in the politics of Guyana. Those of you who would have known Mr. Vincent Alexander would have seen him, would have heard him speak very eloquently, and would have also seen the role that he would have played in the political build-up, the historical political build-up of this wonderful country of ours. Unfortunately, at this time, as we know, the elections recount is ongoing. Who better to hear all of the details from than Mr. Vincent Alexander? Sir, we cannot see you. We know that you're connected. I'm wondering if you're going to join us only by audio, which is fine, but we'd be happy to have you on video as well. So, Mr. Alexander.
Not quite sure I prepared for video.
Okay, that's understood. But sir, let me just say this before I ask you for your opening words. You know, ladies and gentlemen, not many of you would know, but Mr. Alexander is respected not only as a commissioner of the Guyana Elections Commission, but he is an educator. He has been in the education stream all his life, basically. I believe that is his first love, but of course he will correct me if I'm wrong. As an educator, he is a former deputy registrar at the University of Guyana, lecturer, and of course, not just a lecturer, teacher in his own right. He has been a lifelong member, if I'm not wrong, of the People's National Congress, and he would have gotten a lot of persons' respect in his bid for the leadership of that party, which I'm sure we will be talking about later in tonight's program. Commissioner, welcome to our program, sir, and how are you tonight?
Thank you. Not too bad. Just two immediate corrections.
Yes,
one is an update. I was the registrar as well.
Wonderful.
Of the university. That was
Thank
the last job I held.
Okay.
In terms of my membership of the People's National Congress Reform, I last held membership in 2007. As of 2007, I have not been a member or an active politician in the People's National Congress Reform.
Wow, wonderful. I didn't know that, sir. And am I right that your first love remains education?
I love teaching.
I know that. I know that. And we could see
teaching.
it in the way you talk. Yes. So, Mr. Alexander, we want to get right into it. As you know, everybody is just queued in to listen about the education, about GECOM, sorry. You have been at the commission for many years, sir. And you have been not just at the commission as a member of the commission, but you have been an outspoken member of the commission. As you have been part of the Guyanese lifestyles and the Guyanese progresses. And sir, you have been passionate. Recently, I just want to get right into it. You have been passionate about, you know, your own experiences predating this election, going back to 2015. You have had your own experiences, and you have said recently that you have been very open in asserting the changes you feel GECOM ought to have been making from since 2015 elections to now. I would like if we can go back a little bit, sir, and tell us a little bit about some of those things you have been passionate about in terms of changes and, you know, where we are on some of those proposals you would have been making.
Well, I'm not sure there's been much progress on the proposals, but certainly in the first instance, when I look at GECOM itself in terms of how it is made up, it is not an ideal electoral body, because what we've ended up with, for all intents and purposes, is a bipartisan electoral body. And therefore, very often, it is left only to the chairperson to make decisions because the commissioners tend in their bipartisan manner to line up on one side or the other.
Yes.
And so it is left to the chairperson to make decisions. That's one. Secondly, I don't think the GECOM has been sufficiently involved in institutional building. I think in any institution, one ought to be reviewing its performance and based on that review to attempt to build the institution. I think that GECOM has fallen short in that regard. For example, I've advocated for some time now that GECOM needs to have a research department. A research department that would, on one hand, be researching electoral matters and seeing what it can bring to the table for GECOM from the wide body of work on electoral matters, but also one which would be doing research based on the conduct of elections so that GECOM itself could benefit from a proper review of each election in an attempt to ensure that they perfect their own operations. Now,
Right.
that hasn't happened as yet. The last thing we did, in fact, was to advertise that position, but because of internal issues, it's about 2 years we haven't employed that person. So we're not geared to do that kind of work, which I think GECOM ought to be doing.
And today you would have been on camera and something interesting popped up. You know, you were speaking that GECOM doesn't have a prosecutorial arm and necessarily probably a legal arm of its own battery of persons that it can call from an in-house system.
That's correct. We do have someone referred to as a legal officer. But on matters of litigation, GECOM is normally outsourced to a lawyer.
Right.
If one looks at the legislation, there are offenses related to the things that GECOM is responsible for. So, for example, it's an offense for one not to be registered, and I mentioned that today.
Yes. Yes.
Now, if one is to look at GECOM as being parallel to GRA, for example, revenue arm, you will see the GRA has an enforcement arm.
Yeah.
And in fact, the GRA could itself take matters to court. The law doesn't forbid GECOM from doing that, but we don't have the capacity to do that. And so very often, if there are infringements, we refer them to the police, and it's up to the police in terms of what they do. And the history is they have never really done much.
Right. Commissioner, I want to take you back a little bit to Mr. Gokul Budu. You would have been very outspoken in some of the actions of the former CEO, I believe he was, and some of the failings that would have been an indictment on the performance of GECOM itself. I don't know if you want to just educate us a little bit or maybe one or two synopses that might have been pertinent.
Well, I joined the GECOM in 2007. And at that time, Gokul Budu was the chief elections officer. We had two situations in 2011. The first one was a decision was taken that unlike what we usually did, we would not give to political parties, to their polling agents, certificates of employment because we felt that the law did not provide for that, though it had been done in the past. A certificate of employment really allows a polling agent for a party to vote in the place where he or she is working, the polling station where he or she is working, rather than where he or she is registered. So he or she does not have to leave post during a day to go somewhere else to vote. So we decided we wouldn't give that to polling agents. And Mr. Budu did say to us in no uncertain terms that he had not issued any, and whilst we were discussing the matter, that he would await our decision. Our decision was not to give polling agents certificates of employment. On E-Day, at the Alexander Nursery School, I came across polling agents who in fact had been issued certificates of employment. And in fact, these agents were only of one party. I made contact across the country and found that this had happened in other places, and in every instance, it had only been of one particular political party. So that party had a situation where their agents could vote where they were working, and other parties, the agents either didn't vote or had to leave their posts to go somewhere else to vote. So that was the first incident. The second incident, and the more scary one, was the election results. Mr. Boudou brought to us signed declarations allocating seats to parties that was not in keeping with the electoral results. He allocated a majority of seats to the People's Progressive Party and a minority of seats to the APNU and the AFC. When in fact, a mere glance at the results would have told you that that was not possible. But he brought what I considered, what was in fact signed declarations. We were behind time. The diplomats were waiting for us at the Pegasus, and he brought these for us to give our fiat so we can go and make the declaration. Fortunately, when I saw the spreadsheet, even before he brought those results, those declarations, one could see from a percentage perspective in a system which is a proportional representation system and a system that adopts the Hare formula, that the People's Progressive Party had 48.2% of the votes. And under no circumstance, with 48.2% of the votes in a proportional representation system, could the party get the majority of seats. The APNU plus the AFC had 51 point something percent. And so immediately I knew that we would have a hung parliament. Because in our parliament, it is the party that gets the plurality that gets the presidency and the government.
Right.
And so I knew there was going to be a hung parliament. So when I saw this declaration which he brought, immediately I knew it was incorrect. And I challenged him. And his response was that he knew his job, he knew what he had done, and what he had done was correct. I said that we have to agree to disagree. And I requested that legislation, the Representation of the People Act, be brought, that we go through the provisions to see what should have been done. And if, as we went through those provisions, there was no objection to what should have been done, I suggested then he did the wrong thing.
Right.
So we went through the provisions, and there were no objections to the interpretation, and so we agreed at that time that he had done the wrong thing and that he should change the calculations. That was done literally in pencil, and we proceeded to Pegasus to make the announcement.
Okay, understood. Interesting, because sir, often in Guyana we kind of forget the past and we forget history, and the history is always important in guiding us as to the actions we take. Commissioner, I want to come to the 2020 elections then, and I want to start with the following perspective. You are one of three persons representing or nominated by the APNU AFC to the commission.
Nominated by,
yeah. Could you say whether the political party APNU AFC is happy with your work and the work of the commission thus far?
That's an interesting question. I have no reason to believe that they are unhappy.
Okay.
That does not mean they agree with everything I do or say, but I have no reason to believe they're unhappy.
Well, that's why I didn't use the word agree, right? So, Commissioner, recently, President David Granger visited GECOM. As the party's nominee to the commission, were you informed of his visit beforehand? And my specific question to that point is, did Mr. Granger visit as head of state, or did he visit as the head of APNU AFC list in your mind, sir?
Well, first of all, I was not informed as the party's nominee. I was informed like all of the other commissioners were.
Okay.
All of the commissioners were informed. And I think at that time, what they said, doesn't necessarily answer your question, was that the president was going to pay a visit. And so he came, and he came with an entourage.
Mm-hmm.
I myself did not engage him or engage in any aspect of his visit. There were others who engaged him and engaged in the tour he took of the place, because essentially what he did, from what I saw where I was standing, was a tour of the place. He went to some of the workstations, he went to the offices, he spoke to the CARICOM people. It was essentially a tour of the place.
Right.
I found nothing untoward in what occurred. In fact, I didn't know that he had, in fact, had an interaction with the chairman and the CEO and staff. I didn't even know that.
Okay.
Because, as I said, I didn't engage in that tour. And whatever meeting he had with them would have happened along the chain of the tour. Right? So I didn't know that that had occurred. But having heard it occurred, I did not find it anything strange for a number of reasons. One, a few days prior to that, the leader of the opposition was there, and from the information I have, he engaged the chairman as well. And commissioners weren't necessarily engaged in that interaction. So I didn't see a problem, because here he was visiting after the elections.
Right.
And therefore his visit,
would
in
you
my
have
humble opinion, was not likely to have any impact on voting patterns or the results or anything like that.
But would you have preferred for yourself and other commissioners to have been part of that meeting, sir?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily. What was happening at the counting stations, largely, though the commissions supervise exercise, what's happening there really in a day-to-day way comes under the control of the administration.
Okay. So, Mr. Alexander, let's come to the workstations. As you know, you had your opinion before this entire recount started. Your colleagues on the opposite side would have had their concerns. Eventually the commission decided on 10 workstations. As of 2 days ago, you all agreed to 2 additional workstations. Here is my question. The commission, by order, allocated workstations to the various districts. Why didn't the commission, by equal mandate, allocate these 2? Instead, they left it to the secretariat.
I wouldn't say they left it to the secretariat. That is not my understanding.
Okay.
If one reads the order specifies the order in which we would be doing the count. And I have seen nothing untoward in terms of the allocation of those workstations vis-a-vis what the order provides for.
Okay.
So if one sees the order, one will see what the order says. It says we will do region 4, we will do region 1, 2, and 3 parallel, and when the first of 1, 2, or 3 is done with, we'll go to 5 and we'll continue down to 10 in that order.
But it is by virtue of that same argument that one would have thought that any additional workstation would have then gone to 4 first. Because, I mean, it is, you have 1,700 boxes remaining, of which just 700 alone is region 4, district 4.
It's 800.
800.
But the fact of the matter is, I think that logic is slightly flawed for this reason. We understood from the inception that 4 would be counted from day 1, probably to the last day. And that prior to the count of 4, the other counts would be done. So that's how we understood it.
Okay.
The question is whether or not 4 would be done before or after. And in that regard, what would have to be done is a calculation, because to have given for commencement to end and the others a commencement to the end in sequential order, with the assumption that 4 and the last of them 10 will conclude around the same time. So basically, one could not automatically give 4 more stations. 4 has 3 as it is. And 1, for example, had 1. So what one would have to do is to go back to the drawing board and to do a calculation and to see if 4 is in fact, based on the pace at which things have happened, going to end before or after, and that will have to be the basis for the adjustment.
Okay. But
I think the commission will in fact do that calculation.
Okay. But undoubtedly, sir, District 4 is the reason we are where we are. And one would think that the most serious one you would get out of the way first, because that's where everything came to a halt.
Well, everything didn't come to a halt at 4. 4 is the last. It was where things were going to halt anyhow. 4 was the last. Now, that apart, I am not completely in agreement with the argument that we are where we are simply because of 4. I don't completely agree with that argument. There were a number of requests for recount. Region 6, Region 5, Region 4, Region 2, I think even Region 1.
Correct.
So that we have a number of regions that requested the recounts.
But Commissioner, undoubtedly, Sorry, undoubtedly, we know that all those requests for recount was made, but undoubtedly, I think in the case of Region 6, the request was recalled, if I'm not wrong. But the point is that
the request was not recalled in 6.
Okay, but the point is that
the request was aborted after it started because of difficulty they were having.
Okay, but undoubtedly, GECOM would have rejected the request for recounts. However, it is when District 4 got to where it got that, the Madam Chairman and so forth swore in that affidavit and they led to everything. But I take your point. But Commissioner, I want to come to, I guess, let me clarify some
sure.
Sure.
Region 6 was aborted. Region 5 was held in abeyance. Region 4's recount was rejected. Region 3's recount was rejected. So there were a number of recounts and different things occurred: abortion, abeyance, and rejection. So we had all of that hanging there. The question of Region 4 and the court matter, I think there's an absence of clarity on that. When the chairman, Region 4 was cited for contempt, after the matter was taken to the court and the judge instructed that the statements of poll should be used, but that it was up to the Elections Commission to determine the manner in which they proceeded once they used the statements of poll. Subsequent to that, GECOM was once again taken to the court on the grounds that they were not adhering to the judge's ruling. And that was the contempt matter.
Right.
The court never ruled on contempt at that time. The court did not rule on contempt.
But it is still an abeyance, right?
Hold a second. The chairman intervened and said that she will give an undertaking that they will change what they were doing and use the statements of poll. My understanding, because I wasn't intimately involved in Region 4 all the time, what I saw thereafter when they shifted the operation to High Street was the use of the statements of pool. So that one, there was no contempt at that time, and two, the court has never been approached thereafter on the question of contempt. The chairperson said, having given an undertaking that she would have the recount done, that in that circumstance, she would embrace the recount agreed to by the leader of the opposition and the president, and therefore the issue of whether or not we're in contempt and going back to court would not arise, because in any circumstance, a recount would be done.
Right.
So that while she had made a promise, nobody has determined that her promise had not been kept. The contempt matter has not been ruled on. And I think to a very large extent, the response of the president and the leader of the opposition was more to the matter of the diplomatic community and their pronouncements than to the internal matter of the court and its ruling.
But sir, notwithstanding her affidavit to do that recount, notwithstanding her word or undertaking, we are led to believe that Mr. Basil Williams would have advised the commission to not proceed with the recount at that stage.
Mr. Basil Williams did not. When the CARICOM people came, we understood that we had to have an order in order to proceed with the recount, because the recount we were proceeding with was not provided for in the Representation of the People Act. And therefore we had to resort to Article 162 of the Constitution and Section 22 of the Elections Amendment Act, which section provides for the correction of errors. I think it's correction of errors we talk about. Something like that. I get the correct wording just now. And so we started to prepare the order. But we took a decision based on the internal discussions at the commission that we would go to the chief parliamentary officer, who is responsible for legislation and for giving legislative advice, to help us to finalize the order. We then went to him, and two commissioners were the ones who were the front persons in this regard, Commissioner Cs. Conrad and Commissioner Corbin. They went to him and spent half a day and came back and said his advice was that what we were doing was in breach of the law, and therefore we could not proceed. So it was not the Attorney General at all, it was the Chief Parliamentary Officer who gave that advice. Okay.
Sir, as you know, undoubtedly we are going to come to the famous name in Guyana, Mr. Mingo, and the declarations. In hindsight, now that you're 15 days onto the recount, what are Mr. Vincent Alexander's thoughts about Mingo's declarations? Now that especially approximately 60 boxes of the recount have shown that his figures were not reflective of what were on the SOPs or in those boxes.
I have two takes on that. I am presently dealing with a recount, which is intended to provide, according to what our order says, a final, credible result. For that reason, at this point in time, Mingo is not in my window. We have made Mingo and whatever pertains to Mingo aside, and we are proceeding with the recount, which we intend to give us a final, credible count.
Okay.
The Mingo matter is a matter that one can go to as a post-election activity. to determine if Mingo was involved in any wrongdoing. And in that regard, for GECOM to take a decision, the Mingo matter no longer hangs over the determination of our elections in that regard. Suffice to say this, that there has been no legal pronouncement on the Mingo matter.
Okay. But here it is counter. You are GECOM. You are the persons that's adjudicating these elections and would make a decision. However, sir, Mingo, the decisions that took place on that day, let me not call the gentleman's name at this, but those things that happened on that day has led this country into an abyss during COVID-19, and GECOM is spending millions of dollars on a recount. At the same time, sir, one side, one political party, I think Mr. David Patterson was on record 4 days ago saying that his party's SOPs very closely resemble the figures that Mr. Mingo would have declared. So you have a political party saying publicly and still raising an umbrella is probably a bad word to use, Leonard, but raising an umbrella over Mingo's numbers. So we, the population, cannot divorce ourselves away from Mr. Mingo and his infamous figures.
What Mr. Patterson says has absolutely no impact on what GECOM is doing. Patterson is out there with his politicking as every other party is. That is not where we are looking. We are looking at what we're supposed to look at. And at this point in time, what we're looking at is the votes of the citizens to ensure that we come up with a credible final count. In any circumstance, what Patterson says has no influence. And in any circumstance, what Patterson says we have no jurisdiction over. Patterson is out there, like other parties, politicking. GECOM should not be affected or influenced by those postures.
Correct. I certainly wish I could ask Mr. Vincent Alexander, not the GECOM commissioner, what's his personal opinion. But I guess we have to keep that for after the process is completed, sir. But here's what, Commissioner. All of these, I want to come to the observations that is now, ongoing there at the recount, and added to the Mingo's figures and everything that has happened since. Sir, are you, as a commissioner, are you feeling in any way, let me use a strong word, embarrassed at GECOM's inability to bring a credible process to this country? Here is the reason why I ask you that. Every objection, every observation that is being raised and raised so passionately by members of various political parties, isn't it an indictment on GECOM's ability to run an election in this country?
I'm not sure whether it's an indictment on GECOM's ability, because give people a basket to fetch water, then exactly what's happening, the water will penetrate the basket. The extent to which GECOM's request, desire to do a house-to-house registration to renew the electoral roll was in the first instance opposed by most parties, and then subsequently denied. Well, that wasn't denied, but the court impacted the decision. It's the extent to which, in my humble opinion, GECOM had a basket to fetch water. GECOM is not an alien. GECOM is a local Guyanese institution.
But Commissioner, GECOM picked that basket itself, sir. GECOM was not given a basket. I mean, you guys have had biometrics. You guys have had years, I mean, from 2015 election to 2020 to 2019, to be ready to fulfill a constitutional mandate
of having an elections run in 90 days. So to describe it as a basket might be, isn't it of your own making then?
No, it isn't of our own making, because we requested on 3 previous occasions under 2 governments the resources to do the house to house, and they did not give it to us. The money was only for the first time voted in 2019, although GECOM had previously in-house taken a decision that one of the things we ought to be doing is to renew the register every 7 years. They did not give us the resources. And we got the resources in 2019, and then we're not allowed to do the job. And when I say we had a basket to fetch, notwithstanding all the perfections I've heard about in terms of GECOM system, I, as a commissioner, am convinced that once you have a list that has the amount of excess persons that our list has, that it's a recipe for people to attempt to do all sorts of things. And the fact of the matter is, I developed 2 terms pre-elections, not after elections. I developed, the first term I developed was the demography of the polling station. The demography of the polling station. Guyana is a country where there are many ethnic enclaves. Guyana's elections very often reflect an ethnic census. Many of our polling stations, you have one party getting no vote or 2 votes, whilst another party gets 300 and something votes.
Right, but Commissioner,
so my argument is this, that you are likely to end up with people of like mind in polling stations.
Yeah, but hold on a minute.
Like mind,
I agree.
Use the criminological concept of latent crime.
But hold on a minute. You mentioned the registration process. And I mean, we were all told, and I would have supported the time when we had the understanding that the continuous registration, the continuous updating of the list, and all of those things was ongoing. So were we therefore funding GECOM to do nothing over those years?
The continuous registration added to the list. And we couldn't be funding GECOM to do nothing because over those years we had local government elections in 2016.
Yes.
Local government elections in 2018. So a list had to be there and a list was used.
Right.
But the exercise of continuous registration is not an exercise that allows for you to renew your list. It allows for you to add in the main to your list. It does not allow for you to go to that list and to extract, delete from that list all of the hundreds of Guyanese in America who may have died who are registered.
But you just said
that as the example.
But you just said that having such a list, and you were right, having such a list creates all kinds of potential. Have you seen evidence that your fear has borne fruit?
If I've seen evidence?
Have you seen any such evidence that your fear that such a list, bloated list, would have all kinds of potential? Have you seen any evidence that that fear has borne evidence?
I have said to you, GECOM needs a research officer. I have said to you, GECOM needs a research officer. I looked at one polling station and they had a 97% turnout.
Are you
77% turnout. 77% turnout gets close to a 90-something% turnout. There's a lot of question marks that one would have with the level of turnout we have out of 660-something thousand persons, when in fact a real list should not take us to 500,000 persons.
Okay.
Statistically, we have problems. So that's where I start with the statistical problem of a turnout in the vicinity of 70% and higher in some instances. They said they saw one turnout of 90%.
Oh, but Commissioner, I find it difficult though that notwithstanding a bloated list, I find it difficult as a Guyanese that notwithstanding a bloated list, you have a room, an election office, where you have agents of all the parties, you have a GECOM officer heading that polling booth, and yet you would have all of these people suddenly close their eyes or become deaf and dumb, and something untoward happen with some fake person on a list. That is an indictment on your officers, sir. That means somebody somewhere from your office, employed by you, is not doing what they ought to do on election day.
It may be in instances an indictment in the officers, but it may be in instances an indictment of officers who are complicit. And that is why I make the point about the demography of the polling station. If in this country, at the level of our chief elections officer, attempts are made to do things untoward, why do you think that at the lower level, in the demography which I refer to, where people have their biases, and where the opportunity presents itself, that things do not occur? Things, every election we have had petitions from both sides of the fence, where they have in fact made those accusations.
But sir, everybody in the room has a copy of the list. So it means if your officer has been, let me use a harsh Guyanese word, gets bribed, but then it means if it's a PPP get that vote, it means APNU persons were sleeping or vice versa. I mean, so for me, it's a logical stretch that you would have a massive kind of problems that we seem to be telling, the narrative that seems to be relating nowadays.
I don't think there's a massive problem if one understands the nature of our political parties and what happens. One would understand the reality.
Okay. Right.
Let me give you a reverse example. I'm talking about the demography of the polling station. I live in South Randfeld. And I'm not referring here to the 2020 elections. I'm referring to previous elections. And I go to my polling station, and every single person in the polling station is an African Guyanese. Because it's an African Guyanese enclave the station is located in. Every single person, including the PPP's polling agent. I speak to that polling agent to find out that polling agent has no interest in the elections. That polling agent has an interest in being paid because of the state of poverty she found herself in. It didn't matter to her what happened in the elections, but she's a polling agent. So these perfections we are talking about, the second term I coined was the human factor. And I'm saying to you that given the enclaves in which our voting takes place to a large extent, and given the demography of the polling stations, there is the possibility, and there is evidence of the possibility, that things untoward could happen. And the political parties themselves, who are now saying nothing happened, but you go and check the petitions to the court, where they have in those petitions said these things happen.
But Mr. Alexander, it means that the political parties are making a fool of all Guyanese in this recount, because it means all the hullabaloo being created every day to prolong and stretch out this recount and raising all kinds of things that their agents would have been shutting their eyes to. Something is really wrong in this country, and they're just giving Guyanese a lot of crap, to say the least. But sir, I want to take you...
I would simply in that regard agree with you.
Oh, well, thank you. Mr. Alexander, I want to take you right back to that room on that fateful night. I know that I'm not going to ask you to pronounce on Mingo's declaration, unless, of course, you want to again. But, sir, when Mr. Mingo, given your experience of GECOM's inability and your lack of confidence in some of the things, sir, why is it when Mr. Mingo was making that fateful declaration, that is the most important decision for Guyana, you, your other fellow commissioners, and the chairman were having a meeting at that time? Wasn't the Region 4 declaration the most important thing that required your attention, sir?
No, sir. No, sir. Regions are autonomous up to the point of their declarations. Regions do not fall under the scrutiny or jurisdiction of the commission per se at that point in time. I wasn't in Region 1 for the declaration. I wasn't in Region 2. I wasn't in Region 3. I happened to be in the building in Region 4 because, coincidentally, Region 4 is located in the same building.
But Mr. Alexander,
those declarations are made at a regional level. They do not require the presence and or attention of GECOM commissioners at that time.
But therefore,
I say that the declaration which you're referring to
go on, sir.
Is not the final declaration of Mingo. That declaration was not accepted. Subsequent to that so-called declaration, the count continued and a declaration was made at High Street. So the one that had the hullabaloo had no effect on what eventually happened. But people need to understand that in the election process, electoral districts have an operational level at which the center does not intervene.
But sir, the buck has to stop with you guys. The buck has to stop with you all.
Yes, the buck stops with us because after he makes his declaration, if the parties have a problem with his declaration, they have 48 hours after the midnight of the declaration to ask for a recount, so that his declaration is not the end of the game.
But here,
to ask for a recount, then is when the commission gets involved.
Okay, but here what? I mean, the bill to Guyanese taxpayers has been $8 billion, sir. And you are a constitutional body. You have independence. The buck stops with you, your fellow commissioners, and the chairman of GECOM for spending this $8 million wisely or unwisely. But sir, when that proceeding was filed at the court and the court said, okay, go and comply with 84.2. In my mind, 84.2 therefore defines what a declaration should be. The other parties feel that Mingo continued to defy 84.2 in his second declaration. What is Commissioner Vincent Alexander's position with that second declaration, especially given the fact that it's still extant on GECOM's website as
from
legal
a procedural perspective? From a procedural perspective, I would like to see the court pronounce on that. From a procedural perspective, I would like to see the court pronounce on that, because as I said, after the chairman came back, what Mingo was doing previously was not continued. And the declaration that was made at High Street was done after he resorted to the use of the statements of fault. The system provides for if there's a problem for a recount. And that is where the commission comes in.
But one point there, Mr. Alexander. I mean, you are respected for also your legal knowledge, sir. I agree that the commission, the whole thing about a recount is after the fact, but isn't it opposed to Justice Bernard's decision and admonishment that you better get it right than suffer the consequences of having it done wrong?
That pronouncement might have been true, but it has to be related to a process. The process had to be related to gives the returning officer statutory authority. It is only after he's exercised his statutory authority that the commission authority steps in.
Okay.
The commission does not go into a district to dictate what they do.
Understood. But
That's
his
the law.
his supervisor at that stage would be the CEO, right?
For all intents and purposes, he's unsupervised.
Okay. So
buck stops up to that time.
So therefore, Mr. Mingo has, based on what you're advising, or what you're saying here, based on your interpretation of it, Mr. Mingo had the wherewithal and the freedom to do exactly what he did. And unless something drastic happens, we have a long, sorry history in front of Guyana where it could happen over and over again.
Well, it's up to us if we want to decide to change the system. But you know, Mingo is a manifestation, probably, of untowardness that has happened in the past. For example, I, in my political life, represented the PNC in 2006, I think it was. No, 2001. At that time, the returning officer's office was nowhere near to the secretariat. CEO was nowhere near to what the returning officer was doing. We were not in the position of what you saw in 2020 to monitor what the returning officer was doing. In that year, the returning officer started to do a declaration without even informing the party I represented. It only occurred because someone in the building recognized what was happening and alerted me. And when I went down there, a declaration was being done in the presence of one party.
But sir, that's the point. You got involved. You got involved.
I got involved because somebody called me out.
But in this case, the Canadian High Commission is on record saying that she went and she informed you all that the declaration is being done.
Canadian High Commissioner, I have a serious problem with her behavior. First of all, observers are observers. Observers are observers. Whether it's in Canada, America, where they don't have observers anyhow, or elsewhere. Observers are observers. I take umbrage to the commission, the High Commission of Canada, storming into a meeting of commissioners.
Well, she said that she was beckoned by the chairman to enter. Okay.
She stormed in. She didn't ask anybody to enter as far as I'm concerned. And not only did she storm in, she then stormed in and started shouting what we should be doing. And then stormed out, accompanied by commissioners. I did not on that occasion leave the room.
Okay.
I did not leave the room.
Right.
So I did not witness what occurred out there. But what occurred out there is not the declaration to which anyone is now referring.
Understood. But the second one, sir, having seen the commission, having seen what happened in the first instance, couldn't you, your fellow commissioners, and the chairman stop what would have possibly been repeated and what ended up being repeated?
Well, I don't know that there was a repeat, because as I said, after that, the process changed. They moved from Ashman, we went down to High Street. That aspect of the process I witnessed, and I saw the statements of phone being projected. I saw the people who were observers and all of them sitting there, and the declaration was made in their presence.
Right. But sir, the RO, before he makes his declaration, he ought, procedurally, he ought to check and to have the some okay by the CEO, isn't it so?
No, the law does not require that.
Okay, so he has the freedom.
Does not require that, and it has not been the practice as far as I know.
All right, and on that declaration,
in fact, one has to be careful with involving the CEO there. Because what's his purpose? If the law specifies what the RO should be doing, why is the CEO getting involved at that stage? What he wants to do when he has no authority to do something?
But again, the buck stops with him as the buck stops
stop
with
with
you.
him for a regional declaration. A regional declaration, the buck stops at the returning officer.
No, the buck stops with him to ensure that the declaration is compliant with the procedures of GECOM.
He is not involved at that level. He is not even physically present. What would you say about him? He was there in Region 1 to see what happened?
No, I agree with you, but
in Region 2 to see what happened? He was not there.
But isn't he ultimately responsible?
He becomes responsible when that declaration is handed over to him and a party says, we have a problem, we want a recount. He becomes responsible. The system has a mechanism to ensure that if there's anything untoward happening at the level of the RO, that when it comes up, it can be corrected.
Understood. Sir, we are getting to that program time. It's been such an interesting discussion that we didn't realize an hour is quickly going by. Here is my last question to you, with a hope that we can continue this chat another day, pending, of course, your time and availability, sir. The recount process is ongoing. Regions 1 or 2 are finished. There is this thing about certificate of tabulation. What is its legal status if it is not countersigned by all the parties present there, sir?
Well, first of all, I think so far it has been countersigned by the parties. So that's number one. Number two is we are not doing 10 declarations. This process is not a process initiated under the Representation of the People Act. It's initiated under special dispensation of the Constitution and Section 22. What we will do is to receive those tabulations. The Commission will then do one declaration.
Okay. So Mr. Alexander, Commissioner, the problem that a lot of Guyanese have, and I would like you to address the Guyanese nation at this stage. The problem that we have had is that everything went well up to Region 4. The way things are going is that all the other districts will be completed and you will be counting District 4. Sir,
not necessarily. What we will be doing is to be doing a review now that we have additional stations.
Okay.
If we need to give additional workstations to Region 4, that will allow for a completion of everything at the same time.
Give us a guarantee, if you can, that this process will go to its completion so that we can have a declaration from the Guyana Elections Commission.
The Guyana Elections Commission will do everything to bring this process to a conclusion. But this process is not solely dependent on the Guyana Elections Commission. There are stakeholders, and therefore problems in the process could be caused by stakeholders. So I can't put my head in the block for the stakeholders. But I could say that my understanding, and from what's happening, the Guyana Elections Commission will do everything to bring this to a.
Thank you, sir. And I know I said that was my last question, but my final question to you, sir. Supposing tomorrow morning, the PPPC or ACNO AFC or any one of the main stakeholders in the process, if they decide to walk out of the recount and to say they're not participating further, what is the remit then going forward?
Well, there are two things about that. It's like the national registration process. The PPPC were given the opportunity to participate in the registration. Inherent in the registration is a verification. They refused the opportunity. And when the registration was done, then complained it wasn't verified. So if we are going through this process under the law and a party withdraws, then one of the things that faces us is that we are engaged in a legal process and the party has decided it doesn't want to be engaged. I am not saying that is what the decision will be, but certainly it puts us in that position.
Understood. Understood. Well, Commissioner, it's been wonderful to chat with you. I'm afraid we have to wrap up. We have other people having their programs awaiting this timeline. It was certainly a good experience and a wonderful experience to have you here in room 592, sir. And I look forward to having you back in room 592 to continue this conversation, hopefully sooner rather than later, sir. But thank you on behalf of Kaieteur Radio, on behalf of the management and team here at Kaieteur Radio, and of course on my own behalf and co-host. I'm afraid I didn't even give Mr. Gildarie an opportunity to ask any questions.
I'm seeing him on screen, my good friend Gildarie.
But sir, thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure, and do keep up your good work, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen all across Guyana, that was Mr. Vincent Alexander, Commissioner GECOM, and we thank you all for joining us. We say bye-bye now. See you tomorrow on COVID.